United States has become the first country in the world to record more than 2,000 coronavirus deaths in a single day.
Naltrexone hydrochloride is an opioid antagonist, a drug that binds and blocks opioid receptors, and is reported to reduce opioid cravings. If a person relapses and uses the problem drug, naltrexone prevents the feeling of getting high. But this is not the drug's only use. Currently, it is undergoing clinical testing as a potential solution for those grappling with grief. Prolonged grief disorder, or PGD, is diagnosed 1 year after the death of a loved one, in which symptoms of intense yearning for the deceased are felt daily. In March 2022, coinciding with the pandemic, PGD was made an official diagnosis through its inclusion in the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This new disorder status marks the beginning of grief and those grieving as a targeted pharmaceutical market to be profited from. It is hypothesized that PGD is a disorder of addiction. Upon ingestion, naltrexone hydrochloride makes its way to the brain, where it aims to disrupt the social bond that keeps the bereaved attached to their deceased loved one. With one major caveat: the impossible nature of targeting a single social bond. Typically, a new diagnosis is met with celebration, an external source of validation in the world of medicine that so often relies on self-advocacy. But PGD's new disorder status was met with criticism from both those in the medical field and the bereaved, with claims that it pathologizes normal grief reactions, blurring the boundaries between a healthy grief response and a clinically defined disorder. This curative as opposed to preventive response to grief can be read as a necropolitical tool of erasure. Instead of doing everything in its power to protect its citizens, the state, through its failure to ensure the conditions for survival and take timely action, created the avoidable reality of COVID-19 as a mass death event. Since the beginning of the pandemic, there has been little acknowledgement by the US government of those whose lives were lost and those left grieving. This recognition replaced by efforts to curate data and downplay the lethal nature of the virus. With the development of a pill for grief, those lives and those left grieving will continue to be erased from public view, as if the pandemic never happened. When grief is framed as an individual medical issue, it can overlook the broader necropolitical systemic injustices and inequalities, such as inadequate healthcare, discrimination, or systemic neglect that might have played a role. By failing to change these necropolitical social structures, which result in hundreds of thousands left dead and many more in a state of grief, the simple solution to such a complex problem is a pill. A pill that attempts to remove a person's grief response, effectively returning them to their pre-grief state as docile and productive humans. By medicinally subduing grief responses, which are not only emotional responses but politically situated stances that oftentimes serve to keep the state in check, how will the state be held accountable for its lethal negligence now and in the future to come? For the time being, it feels as if there will be more questions than answers. Thoughts of overprescription, the adverse effect on burial rights, justice, and our future relationships to the dead. In the same way the addictive and lethal nature of opioids has only just recently come to light, we will eventually see the real-life effects of a drug with the promise of a death made easier. Until then, we can only hope that naltrexone hydrochloride and subsequent drugs developed to treat grief are only given to those who are in desperate need of them, those whose lives have stopped now that their loved one is gone. Naltrexone hydrochloride, remedy or poison? You decide.